We will make America great again. Again.
Hi, this is Seema Mehta, a political reporter at the Los Angeles Times, and I'm here to review the third night of the Republican National Convention. Mike Pence, the vice president, was the big speech of the night, and he did what he was supposed to do. He delivered a full-throated defense of President Trump and of the administration's policies.
And if you want a president who falls silent when our heritage is demeaned or insulted, he's not your man.
While also being the attack dog, going after Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, arguing that a Biden presidency would make Americans unsafe in their own homes.
Joe Biden said that we were living through a season of darkness. But as President Trump said, where Joe Biden sees American darkness, we see American greatness.
However, the vice president had a number of inaccuracies when he talked about Biden's proposals and plans. For example, he said that Biden supported defunding the police, which is not true.
When asked whether he'd support cutting funding to law enforcement, Joe Biden replied, yes, absolutely. Joe Biden would double down on the very policies that are leading to violence in America's cities.
The former vice president has repeatedly said he does not support defunding the police, that he actually wants to increase the number of police. He also said that the former vice president wants to get rid of fracking.
Where this president achieved energy independence for the United States, Joe Biden would abolish fossil fuels, end fracking.
Which is not true as well, and that's particularly important in states like Pennsylvania that we know are going to be in play in November. But most importantly, Vice President Biden was the only person tonight who was speaking to camera live. Most of the speeches, if not all the speeches, were pre-recorded. And we've had so many developments in the United States in recent days. And we have hurricanes bearing down on the southeast. We have the shooting of an unarmed black man in Kenosha, Wisconsin, where he was shot in the back 7 times in front of his 3 young children. And we've had protests since then. And the vice president had the opportunity to modify his speech, as the other speakers did not have. And he did in some ways. He said to people on the hurricane's path, be safe.
This is a serious storm, and we urge all those in the affected areas to heed state and local authorities. Stay safe.
When he spoke about Kenosha, he spoke about lawlessness. He didn't mention the cause of the lawlessness.
The violence must stop, whether in Minneapolis, Portland, or Kenosha.
He didn't mention Jacob Blake's name. He didn't mention the fact that sports is sort of professional sports is grinding to a halt because players are so upset about what happened. He didn't mention the fact that a teenager who was apparently a Trump supporter shot and killed 2 protesters and wounded a 3rd. So he took a very the theme of the night was law enforcement and supporting law enforcement, and that's what Vice President Pence spoke about. But he didn't speak about the causes of so much of the unrest, which is the shooting of unarmed black men, the killing of unarmed black men. And it just seems, I found it stunning because this just happened. There is so much, Americans are talking about this right now. He had the opportunity to address it, and he chose not to.
This is not just a choice between Republican and Democrat, or left and right. This is an election that will decide if we keep America, America, or if we head down an uncharted, frightening path towards socialism.
We saw a number of appeals tonight to minority voters and women voters. For example, we saw Kellyanne Conway, the senior counsel to President Trump, and Kayleigh McEnany, who's the White House spokeswoman, make really direct appeals to women voters. We saw a number of minorities, supporters of President Trump, make appeals to minorities. And these are, I think that's a recognition of the fact that if you look at women voters, suburban women voters in 2018, in particular in the midterms, they deserted Republicans, and that's why Republicans lost control of the House. They need these women to come back, in terms of if they hope to hold on to the White House. Minority voters haven't voted for Republicans in quite some time in large numbers. But again, that's another area where if the president can make some inroads, it could help his chances to being reelected in November. But again, with these cases, we saw some contradictions. For example, when Kayleigh McEnany spoke about having a preventative mastectomy, she spoke about how it showed, President Trump, called her afterwards, and she was talking about how it showed his concern for people with pre-existing conditions.
But now I know him well, and I can tell you that this president stands by Americans with pre-existing conditions. In fact, President Trump called me this morning. I spoke with him several times today, and he told me how proud he was of me for sharing this story. The same way President Trump has supported me, he supports you.
But if you look at his policy, one of his greatest attempts has been to get rid of Obamacare, which provided the first major protections for people with pre-existing conditions. You also saw people try to paint Joe Biden first as responsible for, for locking up Black men because of his support of the crime bill in the 90s. But at the same time saying that if he's elected, your streets will be unsafe because criminals will be running loose. So I do think there was a bit of conflict in the message. The one thing we saw tonight that I think was very traditional conventions, and what we haven't seen a lot of is seeing people interact in person. Because of COVID, both the conventions had to largely be held virtually. But tonight, when Vice President Pence spoke in Maryland, he had a crowd of supporters in front of him. The president and the first lady showed up. They were greeting people and waving at people. They were down at the rope line, and it was a reminder of how conventions used to be and how political events used to be and how campaigns used to be. I mean, it made me a little bit nostalgic because we haven't seen that in quite some time. And it's unclear, when we'll be able to see that in large numbers again. But it was a little bit of picture of like what life might look like when we return to normal, when we return to normal. So thank you so much for joining us tonight. And we have one more night, and President Trump speaking tomorrow night. So while conventions can often be predictable, especially when they're in this format, we never know what the president's going to say. So tomorrow night, definitely tune in.